Great. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you had a chance to get a little refreshment, get prepared, because with that warm-up, hopefully you really get the perspective of where we're going. And I really want to thank our speakers in the first session. They set the tone beautifully. We've been doing that for several years, and hearing really from the guys on the front line why we're here, it really sets the tone. And for me personally, it makes me want to just get back to work. And so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to do what they do well, which is not stop with their first job, but we're going to actually invite the clinicians back up on stage. They have to work again. But in this case, it's going to be an informal Q&A. Dr. Hoganson is going to moderate a discussion about the technology, questions that he has about their applications, and hopefully touch on some of the questions that you might be thinking, particularly the audience who are virtual. Hopefully he'll cover some of those ideas. So with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Hoganson back to the stage. And you can then invite your panelists. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, perfect. So maybe we'll have the panel come up. So we've got a terrific panel today, which has a lot of different perspectives, some different angles on how to use modeling and simulation, both clinically as well as in the research development. So we have three panelists here, and then we have one panelist who's joining us virtually, who couldn't make it. So for those of you who were in the morning session today, you heard from Dr. Alan Zaharias about his efforts in in-silico clinical trial work, and of course, Dr. Darby, you guys heard from just recently about the pioneering work they're doing with mitral valve therapy, and then Dr. Wolfgang Getz brings this incredible adult experience, both in devices and in adult cardiac surgery. So we're going to be able to. Oh, sure. Up there, hold on to that. So we're going to be able to hear from them, and then Dr. Rena Ghosh is a pediatric cardiologist who has expertise in axial imaging. Here's Rena joining us from Philadelphia. And so we'll be able to chat about a number of different topics similar to what you've heard from earlier. So I'm going to start with you, Alan. Alan's an interventional cardiologist at Washington University in St. Louis, who directs the structural heart program. And Alan, you do a lot of these different structural heart interventions with a wide range of device technologies. With your experience in the Living Heart program and the in-silico clinical trial, how do you really envision these virtual twins playing a role in your field in the pre-procedural planning as well as the intraoperative guidance?
So I think the field of structural interventions has grown dramatically because of the ability to bring CT scans or 3D modeling into play. What we originally, or my mentors started just doing with simple tools, I think we've been able to elevate to a little bit more of an elegant fashion for these plannings. And as a result, I think that any structural procedure that we do, maybe not necessarily a simple atrial septal defect closure or a PFO closure, but perivalvular closures or iatrogenic ventricular septal defects that occur, or atrial septal defects that occur, are totally going to be guided with the 3D model. And by doing so, since we're going to have more tools to use or more devices to treat with, we should be able to select the right one to do it, in addition to make sure that our patients are positioned in the right way, or the gantry is positioned the right way, so we can get the best optimization of views, as opposed to just trying to take a lot of pictures and wasting a lot of contrast.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that there's the mathematical and computational piece that we've been able to add to the operating room seems like it's going to play a huge role in knowing going in, I'm going to need an occluder of this size or that of this size, and if I stretch this tissue a little bit, it's going to fit just right. Seems like there's a lot of opportunities in that way to sort of not do what you've always done, which is put it in, see if it fits.
Yeah, and then pull it out if it doesn't.
And then pull it out if it doesn't. So, I think it's exciting, and we'll see how that evolved. But as the question in the last session, scale becomes an issue. You guys do a lot of procedures in your lab, and the scale for adult therapy is so much bigger than kids. So. And
it is time consuming. The part of the modeling of the CT scan is the one that takes the most amount of time for us to be able to do a procedure. But at the end of the day, you pay for it up front and then makes the procedure a lot quicker and simpler afterwards.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Wolfgang, like Alan, you've focused a lot of your career on both the device development and technology development, and certainly adult cardiac surgery continues to evolve. How do you envision 3D models and virtual twins playing a role in adult cardiac surgery? Obviously in heart failure, there's a lot of opportunities, as you showed, but even in the other aspects of adult cardiac surgery.
In any aspect, in any aspect of structural heart, you will do first simulation before you go into device development and animal trials. You don't want to use too many animals. You want to reduce it as much as possible, and then before you go into human, you want to have a proper simulation for that. And FDA is interested in supporting simulations for the approval process. So I think that's the key part now in developing medical devices, and it was key with the development of the atrial shunt devices. I don't know if you're familiar with. They started out with simulations, with fluid dynamic simulations, before they even started drilling holes in the septum.
Yeah, and I think the development piece stands to really be accelerated. I think with devices like yours, where it's very much a physical device,
yes,
but applied in a very patient-specific way, and it seems like there's a great opportunity to accelerate that device development. For teams like yours, using these kind of models.
Yeah, but we also don't want to build up our own simulation program. We want to use an existing model that is approved and is closest to reality.
Yeah. No, and I think that's true, and I think that's one of the things that we've seen also is that other groups that maybe don't have the size or scale that we do, they also want to use modeling simulation. How do you make these tools available no matter what your size? Alan's at a huge institution. Maybe they could build a program, but a smaller program or a smaller startup maybe doesn't have.
As a startup, you don't have the money to employ engineers to program your model.
Yeah.
So you want to use what is out there.
Yeah. No, I think there's a huge opportunity, and I think we're going to learn a lot more tomorrow morning about the efforts on the regulatory side and the developments of the pathways to use modeling, both in a preclinical way as well as part of the clinical trial process. But maybe share with us a little bit about your thoughts about that simulation and preclinical testing, which up until now has really not been used, with rare exceptions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we look in our device, what we have here is two chambers, a connector in between, filled with a fluid. So you have a bunch of components that can be simulated, beginning from the material properties of the chambers to the material property of the volume of the fluid that we want to use, to the fluid dynamics characteristics of the whole device. So I'm hoping that we can simulate this device prior starting going into any kind of production.
Yeah, great. Zed, you bring a perspective that you were in physics first, and then you were in medicine, and now you're in a very prestigious lab with a very successful guy who's developed other mitral valve therapies. Can you share with us a little bit about your guys' vision for, we saw some of your efforts in one project, but your vision about how you're going to use these models for device development, and how much you think those are going to, replace what we've always done in the physical realm?
Yeah, so in terms of device development, the two main areas that we're using it for mostly are very similar to you with designing patches, trying to see if we can optimize the patch shape. And the other area that we're looking into a lot is approaching the heart. For some of our other interventions that we're working on, we have to focus very much on, we're trying to see, can we do this through a left thoracotomy? So do it through a small incision on the left side of your chest instead of opening up the full sternum for some minimally invasive approaches. And that's a lot of what we're using the 3D printing for, is to help with those kind of plannings. The studies that we're using it for, we see it being very helpful with that, because right now our ex vivo models that we have, like I mentioned, are limited. and they're expensive. You know, we have to order the hearts, we have they freeze, or frozen, we have to plan, make sure they thaw out, make sure they're not, you know, the right size, that we have to clean them out with all the blood that's left in there. It's a lot of work and a lot of dedication from the team involved in it. And compared to being, you know, sitting down at a computer remotely, the way we have it set up now, the people, or myself working on the simulations, can work remotely from anywhere. We log into the computer and we can do it, and it's much more convenient, and I think that's going to play a large role. And the researcher side of people adopting this is the convenience for the researcher. It's a very big motivator for people.
Sure, sure. And as you've sort of spanned the digital world and the capabilities that we have now, and still some of the physical world, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the virtual space that maybe we should focus on improving, so we can, you know, take those parts further?
Yeah, so I think one of the weaknesses with the virtual world right now is to some extent a little bit of the collaboration side with the size of the files. Okay. It can take a while to upload these and transfer them and share them with people. You know, especially depending on your internet connection where you are, and thinking of this global connectivity, that you can run the simulation, but if it's still, you know, it's faster to mail a USB drive of it, which it's not now, but that was a while ago for technology. Yeah. It is a concern that, you know, I think will be addressed as technology and things improve. I mean, our CPUs are getting faster, our cell connections are getting faster. We're orders of magnitudes faster speeds than where we were several years ago when we were first talking about mobile networks. So I think that was something that will come along, but right now it's an issue that I have, is having to share these files, is, you know, having to, you know, upload it, wait for it to be uploaded, send to them, have them download it. And as you know, as a surgeon, it's hard to press download and make sure that you're at the computer for the full thing to download.
What I see as a limitation, so what I experienced with what I do with these tracked heart failure devices, you get what you have put in. So I was talking about the apex moving or not moving. And so if you make a wrong model, then you'd get a wrong output. And having the right input depends on people having the right insight. And so there I see is the largest limitation or the biggest problem of these systems, because we don't know everything, and the system cannot know more than we know.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the challenges that we've had along those lines is, you know, you're trail breaking into space. I mean, you're in a space that nobody's ever been in, right? Yep. Nobody's ever looked at this. Nobody's ever thought about it that way. And then how do you validate those models, right? And we've struggled with this, and you know, we've taken the 100% validation approach that everybody gets a cardiac MRI. At just, you know, because I need to know, you know, did what we say was going to happen, did it happen, or did it not? And if not, why not? You know, and it seems like you guys are facing the same challenges because you're in a space that, you know, has never been touched before.
And now everyone is so excited and drunken of AI. AI has the same problem. AI can't be better than we are, because it depends on the input still.
Yeah, it's true. Alan, you played a big role in the in silico clinical trial, which has been an ongoing collaboration between the FDA and Dassault Systèmes, and then many physicians and scientists around the country. You know, from that experience, can you talk a little about your vision? Because there's so many opportunities in structural heart disease to investigate new devices, and a lot of clinical trials. I know you've participated in many of them. Can you give us a little picture of what the future might look like with these in silico clinical trial opportunities in your field?
Well, as you know, Dave, there's, you know, a lot of different clinical trials that are ongoing for mitral valve prosthetics, catheter-based mitral valve prosthetics, or even new atrial septal defect occluders, or even left atrial appendage occluders. And all of these come with a certain amount of iteration and slow progress, mostly because of limitations that are encountered. I think if you can model a fair amount of them ahead of time, then you can get the perfect prosthetic prior to then going into the animal model the first time or the second time around. By trying to place these devices within a computerized model, you could foresee potentially, as long as you have the right inputs, where your mechanisms of failure could be, and then that could allow you to iterate before you then finalize your model and then put it in a live model. I do think that the chronic animal model will still continue because we do need to know what the effects of the biology within the devices. But I'm hoping that they will definitely cut back on the number of patients that need to be treated, as long as we can prove that it is safe and that you can continue to apply it to other structures. Now, in the silica trial, we did a procedure and then we obtained the model from the results of those procedures. I think for this to be successful, we kind of need to do the opposite. And I don't know how to get the images ahead of time that you can then test to see if they're going to be effective.
Yeah.
How does that work out?
I think, I think there's a lot of ways to use these, and certainly, I think, one of the lessons from the in-silico clinical trial is, in the device that we worked with, there was clearly a learning curve clinically that potentially could have been avoided, where the first experience, which you were part of clinically, was one clip in the middle and hope for the best, and now it's not done that way. And now that was all learned as part of the early experience within the trial, and potentially, as you said, could have been, learned digitally before the trial started and saved a few years of development of that technology. So, I think your question about how to get the the actual patients, really, has been highlighted by the work that Rena's done with our group. Rena, thank you for joining from Philadelphia, and appreciate you being here. And so, Rena, can you share with us a little bit about your vision of, as this valve modeling has progressed really quickly in the last year or so, which there's a lot of years of development behind this, with you and Matt Jolly and other people really developing these tools, which took a long time. Can you give us a vision of how these sort of models are going to play a role both in virtual surgery as well as in these in-silico clinical trial evaluations, as Alan alluded to?
I think one of the important things that you were all just talking about was the input, right? Like the imaging that is going in and representing this patient's anatomy. And I think that these huge advances that have been made, right, in CT technology, CMR technology, as well as contrast development, that really will now give us the substrate to start even talking about virtual surgery and in silico clinical trials, particularly for patients with congenital heart disease. Prior to this, right, like imaging the heart is, I think, one of the harder things for us to do as imagers, because the heart moves. And in the heart, right, the valves move most of all. And then when your patient is only 5 kilos or 10 kilos, it's a very tall order. But now with all of these advances, we finally have the substrate to provide to all of you who are on the panel, in the room, to be able to take it to that next step. And I think overall what this is going to do for us, I think, is democratize a lot of these advanced surgical techniques, because you're now making this technology available to everyone. You're allowing people to really learn from your experience in a digital format, kind of the way that you were just showing in your slides, several minutes ago. Looking at what the modeling looks like and then comparing that to the intraoperative videos and validating the fidelity and being able to use that to teach and learn from surgeons all over the world.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a great opportunity to make really a community effort out of this, as you said, Rena. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how to quantify and really programatize these kind of repairs using this kind of imaging technology, because I think that's what'll take it out of big centers with expert surgeons into every patient, and really make this something accessible to everybody.
I think that now that well, the biggest thing I think is that we need to have a multidisciplinary effort to take this to the next step, right? Like as we previously everybody sort of sitting in their silos, not interact, surgeons and cardiologists not necessarily interacting as much or not interacting with the engineers, realizing that these efforts will go forward kind of once we're all in the same room talking to each other, and you tell the engineer, this is what I wish that I knew, and then you speak to us as the imagers and say, this is exactly, you know, the phase of the cardiac cycle that I want to freeze. That's what I want to study. That's where I need to focus my repair. And now that all of this is digital, I think that we, for the first time, have the opportunity to like cohort all this data from, let's say, across the nation or across the world, and from there demonstrate what the value of this technology is. I think, you know, part of the issue is whether it's with reimbursement or whether it's with, you know, getting these techniques out to smaller centers and not having it concentrated in sort of tertiary care academic world, is the fact that we don't have these studies. And so I think that's really what our next step needs to be.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think as far as your question, Alan, there's, you know, that'll be the opportunity, right? You know, as you move forward with device development and even in clinical trials, like how do you incorporate both preoperative planning as well as the in-silico clinical trial piece, right? I think there's huge opportunities to make these virtual patient cohorts, which is super important, but that's one arm of it, right? And it you know, it can be, you know, enhanced by a patient-specific planning on top of that, you know, to learn what the device may or may not be able to do, and then how to do it in that particular patient. So you know, there's so many opportunities to apply this technology. It'll, you know, be exciting, you know, as it continues to develop. So, you know, Zed, you're in a different phase than Wolfgang, right? So you're at the, you know, you're a surgical resident, like, you know, still completing your training, and you've been able to interact with these 3D models and these 3D technologies in a totally different way than, you know, than we had. How do you envision those playing a role in education and training, both, you know, at the medical school level and at the, you know, resident and fellow level?
Yeah, so I mean, the models are incredibly powerful at, you know, giving you a sense of how things interact with each other and what changes you can make. I mean, I always learned best by trying to break something and see what happened when I try to fix it back again. And I think the models kind of give you that sense.
Spoken like a true physicist.
Yeah. You can essentially play around with the heart. You can make the leaflet shorter. You can make it longer. You can change the annulus. And you can actually see in real time how that's going to affect the rest of the heart. And you can get a better understanding as you make the decisions and change the heart and reenact the diseases, get a better understanding of how that starts affecting the changes. And I think that's, you know, useful for anyone at any level. In terms of getting it into schools and getting it into residency, I think is going to be the harder part. It's not going to be, no, is this useful? It's going to be, is this useful enough? And then getting people to get on board and get it into the schools and the residency trainings. And I think that's going to be a very similar way to the only historical example I can think of is robotic surgery. Is when we first enacted getting the robot, the Da Vinci robot, intuitive, having them, you know, sponsor courses for attendings, and then at the same time getting curriculums written for them for residents as they're training. I think is going to have to be. I think there's a lot of parallels between adopting new technologies like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and Wolfgang, you touched on this a little bit, the challenge of how do you change the whole paradigm of how a disease is appreciated, and, you know, some of the features that very few people know really has a huge clinical impact. You know, it seems like there's a role for that too.
Yeah, definitely. And regarding, I want to take it a step further, not only about my device, but in general. How do you train your young surgeons? Do you want to put them on a difficult case and want to let them do a really challenging repair? No. So how do you want to do it? And we need more and more surgeons, cardiac surgeons in every field. The surgeons who are working have no time to train these people. So we have to find a different way to train the students. And I see this in silicon world as an opportunity there. We are working on a haptic robot arm that in a virtual space you can train surgeons doing the procedure. Now, and we have tested in the clinic, also with students. And they loved it. So they preferred working with this quasi-virtual space and robotic arm. They preferred it before working on a cadaver. And they play with that twice as long as they would do in a cadaver. And so with this, you can do training, and the better the models are and the better the robotic is, the more surgeons you can train all over the world. Imagine China somewhere. How do you want to train someone there being a pediatric cardiac surgeon?
Yeah. It's really challenging. And Rena, you're in a field of maybe the most complex three-dimensional anatomy that there is, right? How do you envision, and I know you've done some of this playing a role in resident and fellow education and trying to quickly wrap your head around these different 3D complexities of congenital heart disease?
I think it's going to, and already has, made a huge difference in terms of resident and fellow education, particularly because right now our standard of care, right, is 2D images, whether it's from echo or CT, etc. And so not only do you have to remember the anatomy and then remember all the different pathologies that could occur, but that resident, that fellow, has to now transform all those 2D images in their mind into what things would look like in 3D. And the ability for students to see that in 3D, whether it's a 3D print they hold in their hand, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's on a digital screen, has already been shown to increase their knowledge base, and I think has the potential to be really, really game-changing in resident education.
Yeah, no, I think it's that's totally true, and I think there's a family component to it, particularly in congenital heart disease, but no different than adult heart disease. About how do you use these tools to really get the families to a place where they understand what's going on, and can play a meaningful role in decision making, and not just okay, doc, whatever you say, but really understand the complexities of what's at hand. Alan, one of the really remarkable advances is some of these interventional cardiology training tools, and even clinical simulation tools. Have you been able to interact with any of those? Biomotics has made some, which Patrick referenced earlier today in his video.
So I've been able to interact with some of the older generation of the simulating models, and the majority of those are still lacking. I'm looking forward to the one that gives you appropriate haptics in your hand when you're immersed in the virtual reality headset, and then you can see you can feel as you puncture a needle and go through the different layers of tissue until you make it into the artery, or potentially plan for, if you encounter a complication, how to address it or deal with it. Because we're fortunate enough to live in an environment where the number of complications that we have are very limited or far between. Yeah. And many of our trainees go a whole cycle without really looking or experiencing one of these major complications. And as a result, they're not necessarily trained to actually tackle them when they finish. Yeah. So it may not be a bad idea to try to gather that information, so then everybody could be literally embedded into that component.
Yeah, and it's another great sort of marriage between the material properties, trying to replicate those soft tissues, and the three-dimensional anatomy. I know. As you were mentioning, training surgeons, the University of Toronto group has made a number of congenital models for the arterial switch operation and other things, which are exactly that, which allow residents to over and over, do the arterial switch operation in a lifelike model that they can cut and sew and move the coronaries and all the things that we did the first time on patients.
Like a flight simulator. You put them really in a difficult situation.
Yeah, no, I think there's a huge opportunity to sort of marriage those two worlds to really accelerate, that sort of training. So, I guess the last question I have is maybe for each of you, just you've each been involved, because I know each of you in device development, I think that one of the most important potential gains is the acceleration of device development. So maybe just from each of you, talk a little bit about how you anticipate that these virtual twins and 3D models and virtual development can accelerate that process, because I think that's one of the major challenges for all of us, is it still takes 10 years.
I can start quickly. I'm in the process of looking at different type of ASD closure, for example, and we don't have a good sizing matrix. And I would imagine that using this type of model for the sizing matrix would be quite simple and much more effective than us trying to perform physical holds in an animal and then see if these things would work or not. So I think that definitely would iterate quickly and allow us to know what our sizing matrix would be like.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, the speed at which we can iterate is going to be vastly improved. I mean, right now we're at the very early stages working with ex vivo models and animal models, and we can really only, if we're busy, we'll do maybe 2 ex vivo models a day, maybe an animal model a week, maybe 2 if we really push it. And that's just for one size, for one data point. And when we're trying to find out what sizes for patch design is best, that takes years.
You design a heart valve prosthesis on a self-expanding nitinol stand. You do a fatigue test that will last 9 months. And then you find out it breaks at exactly this point. Do a good simulation before, you know already the weak spots and you can prevent it. And so 9 months, simply for one iteration.
Yeah, it's tough. Rena, what are your thoughts as far as both device and procedure development? As we think about new therapies, structurally or valvular-wise, about these kind of models accelerating how quickly we, can develop these sort of therapies.
I think the ability to do virtual device fit testing is really one of the things that can accelerate, all the work that you've really spoken about, because you can really, even if you have sort of core centers that know how to do this work, if institutions have similar imaging protocols, they can send you their scans and you can do virtual device fit testing for patients who are across the country. I think it'll make a really big difference.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you all for joining the panel discussion. Thank you, Rena, for joining from Philadelphia. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.